Hi, my name is Sycra, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make characters less boring. If your problem is that you end up with poses that are stiff and your characters just look boring, hopefully this will give you some tips on how to make more dynamic poses and make your characters more interesting to look at. So let's deal with probably the worst, most boring pose you could think of, and then we'll go on and improve on it. So, just gonna sketch in a character real quick and get the proportions down. So there. Let's say this is a woman character. And here we have a very boring pose. I could flesh it out a bit, just because it's a bit hard to see. Doing her in a bit of a cartoony style. But yeah, so we have a character and she's just standing here and not doing much. And everything is pretty much straight on. So if you split her down the middle, she's pretty much symmetrical. And added this thing with her hair that it's not symmetrical. But if we didn't have that, she would pretty much be just a symmetrical, boring character. And another boring pose would be a straight-on side view. So, how do we make these more interesting? Well, an easy way is to add variation and to get rid of symmetry. Probably the thing that kills a good pose the fastest, or an appealing image, let's call it that, an appealing image, is symmetry. When things just look the same on both sides. So here there's less symmetry in the pure side view. So it's already a tiny bit more interesting than this view, which is straight on. But we can take this view and work on it so that it's more interesting. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. And let's see what we can do to make this more interesting. Well, an easy thing is to change the angles of the shoulders and the hips. And you want to do it so if the shoulders are going at this angle, the hips are going to counter them in that angle, so that you end up with a balanced pose. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna tilt the shoulders a bit and the hips, and now that's gonna change the legs a little bit. And now this leg can't be the same length as this leg because the hip's raised and this hip's lowered. So this leg's gonna need to be bent, or, I mean, like if it's straight on, it's gonna need to be a bit bent or pushed to the side a bit. So I'm gonna push it to the side. And now instantly we have a better pose just by changing the angles of the shoulders and the hips. But what else can we do? Well, another thing we can do to add variation, right now you see we have this nice kind of S curve that formed, whereas here everything's just straight up and down. Now we have this nice S. We can tilt her head as well. So let's do that. I'll make a copy of this. And I'm going to tilt her head, but what I'll try and do is I don't want it to be looking, you know, in the same direction as this body. So maybe her head's looking in this direction. And the reason I'm doing that is because her body's kind of facing this way, right? So I'm going to tilt her head in the opposite direction. Now remember, why we're doing this is because we just want to get as much variation as possible and get rid of some of the symmetry. So there, that's a bit better. She's kind of looking down like that. And another thing you can do is start to bring the body so it's not just, you know, straightforward. We can start to twist things even more. So in the same way that we twisted her head, I'm going to twist other parts of her body. So her head's looking this way. I'm going to bring this shoulder forward and push this one back. So instead of this, where her shoulders are like this, I'm going to take it so this one comes forward and then this one goes back in space. So we have some perspective going on. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to have her body twist in a way that this part's facing this way and then this part's facing this way. Let's bring her shoulder forward. Push this one back. And now her center line, instead of being in the middle of her body, it's moved off to the side. So now this arm shows, and this arm, the shoulder's back here, so maybe you don't see, you don't see it coming out, you just see it kind of peeking out from behind here, because if we were to draw that arm in, it would be going behind this body, right? So you don't see that. And so now we have the body twisting like this. And now the shoulders are doing this, so I'm going to switch the hips. So this one is raised. It's really going to make things a lot more dynamic. And I'm going to push this leg back in space. So like that. So instead of this just being, you know, both feet are on the same level, now nothing's on the same level. One shoulder's up, one shoulder's down, one foot is back, one foot is forward. So we're really changing the pose quite a bit. And because this arm comes forward, I'm actually going to make this leg come forward. Usually what happens is if you have one, like the left arm coming forward, the right leg, the opposite leg will probably come forward. So now I have a pose where one leg's forward, one leg's back, one arm's forward, one arm is back. And I'm going to bend her arm so that the hands aren't both coming out. So maybe she's holding on to side of her body. And I want to get this so her head's facing this way, so we have the curve, like the curve of the center line. It's going to go down here, then it's going to twist here, come this way, then it's going to twist and go this way. It's going to have this push out. So I'm going to make that leg a bit different. So it's actually pushing out like so. And I also just gave a bit of gesture to this hand, making it a bit more interesting. And now, instead of making this hand just coming straight like this, I'm going to add some foreshortening. So this arm's going forward. And the way I do foreshortening is I like to think in terms of cylinders. So shapes like this, and then I get rid of this, for example. This is coming towards us. This is going in this direction. So I'm going to have it so the arm's coming towards us like this, and then it bends back. So now we have some overlap, have a more dynamic pose, but we can take this even further. And how do we do that? Well, we can introduce perspective. So right now, if we look at this character, we're kind of looking right here. So if this is the camera, it's kind of looking dead on, right? Well, you can raise that camera so you're kind of looking up or looking down or looking up. That's going to change the perspective. So let's do one where we're like near the floor and we're looking up at her. So I'm just getting in a rough guide of some perspective lines. And I'm going to just do the same pose, but in perspective. So have her head. It's going to look pretty small because we're looking up. And have her hips going like this. And now I'm starting to use circle shapes for this line, the line of the hips. So I can see it as a 3D form. So this whole body kind of is like a cylinder, like this. So now we have a much more dynamic pose. We have tons of asymmetry. If you split this down the middle, the sides are going to look completely different. So that's really a push dynamic pose. But even if you forego the weird, crazy perspective and you just stuck with this version here, it's still pretty interesting when you compare it to this straight one or this perfectly, facing just the side view one. So it's all just things to think about. How to add variation. So tilts, tilt the head, tilt the body, the shoulders, the hips. Make, twist, not just tilt, but add twist. So the body's twisting around, head's twisting, and just variations like break things up. That creates a more interesting silhouette. And this really works for everything. If you have any kind of pose, you can make it more interesting by looking at that, even if it's just a head and it's a portrait and you have, like, this is your composition. You have a guy and he's just looking at us. This is me, by the way. So, yeah, he's just looking at us. It's boring. I want to make that more interesting. Twist the shoulders, give it like a 3/4 look. Make some tilt to the head, so maybe the head's tilted. Bit like this. This is pretty extreme. You don't have to go this crazy, but head tilted, and maybe head's tilted like this, but the body's still facing forward, so then you're going to get some nice twisting happening with the neck. Maybe one shoulder's raised and one's kind of lowered. Maybe this is resting somewhere, so anyway, I think you get the idea. Just add variation as much as you can. And I understand this is pretty advanced, because you might be able to know this on a level where it makes sense as a concept, but then executing it is a bit of a different story. So what you do need for this to work is you do need to understand your forms, how things appear in 3D space. But if you're at that stage and your poses are still looking boring, then this is something you should consider. What are you looking at? All right, so yeah, I think even if you're starting out, you can just try and add little bits of variation. You know, turn the face just a bit. Maybe have the body turned a bit that way, so you know, you get just some small variation. It doesn't take much. Just to add that interest. All right, hope that helps.